Hi everyone. Today's learning is writing equation from graphs of sine and cosine and sine cosine related word problem. So a sine graph, start very simple sine graph without any transformation. We'll start from origin 0, 0. We start from here. It will go up to the maximum, go down to the middle, keep going down to the minimum, then back to the middle position. That's a simple sine graph. So one thing you can notice for sine graph, start from the origin, start going up. If you look at this graph, it start from the origin, but it start going down and come back to the middle position, go all the way up to the maximum, then comes back to the middle. So these two graphs, one thing you can notice is both of the graphs start from the origin. So easiest way to analyze these graphs will be sine, because sine graphs start from the middle, like origin, if there's no transformation, not complicate transformation. So if graphs start from the origin, I will probably go with a sine graph. You might say, this is a normal sine graph. Why is it going down and going up? So if you look at it, from here, sine graph, it's reflected over x-axis. So this top portion reflected to the bottom. This bottom portion got reflected to the top. So this is the original graph of y equal to sine x graph. And when you reflect this over x-axis, graph would look like this. Reflection over x-axis, you need to put minus in front of the entire expression, meaning the a value here will include minus. So if you see minus in front of the whole sign, that graph shape would look like something like this. If you look at this right hand side, y equal to a cosine bx, cosine graph start from the maximum and goes down to the middle, hit the minimum, come back up to the middle, keep going up to the maximum. That would be very simple cosine graph without much transformation. If you look at this graph start from the very minimum, come back to a position, go all the way to the maximum, come to the middle, all the way down to the minimum. So these graphs, if you look at it, the graph does not start from the origin. So easiest function you utilize with this graph will be cosine graph. Cosine function. So typical cosine function start from the very maximum. And you might say, why is it coming starting from the bottom? Well, this one, if you reflect over x-axis, top portion reflect to the bottom portion will reflect to the top portion reflect to the bottom. So if you look at it, this graph, if you reflect over x-axis, it will become this graph. So that will be easily represented by cosine graph, cosine function with minus in front of it. Because from regular cosine function, it's a reflection over x-axis. And to apply that transformation, you need to put minus in front of the entire expression. So a has to be negative. So it's very critical for you to understand these diagram and explanation. Start from the origin. Easiest way, deal with the sine function. Start going up, sine. Start going down, minus sine. if we start from the maximum or minimum, then easiest way for you to deal with is cosine function. If you start from the maximum on y-axis, then it's easier for you to use cosine. If you start from the minimum on y-axis, then it's easier for you to deal with cosine with a minus in front of it. So it's minus cosine x. Okay, having that in mind, let's look at the example. Write an equation of the form y equal to a sine bx or y a cosine bx. So later on, once you learn phase shift, which is basically horizontal shift, you can express this using sine, or you can express this graph using cosine. Because once you phase shift sine cosine, they are becoming exactly this graph. So since we haven't learned phase shift yet, let's just deal with it just using sine graph, sine function or cosine function without. So referring this will be the key. First thing you need to recognize, can I use sine here, cosine here? Well, it all depends on y-axis. On y-axis, does graph start from the maximum or minimum, or does graph start from the middle? Well, if you look at the y-axis, that's as high as it can go. Graph-wise, it starts from the maximum, middle, minimum, middle, maximum. That's one period right here, one cycle. So if you look at it, this should fall into this style. Start from the maximum, go back down all the way to the minimum, go back up to all the maximum. That is a cosine graph. So right then you should know, this graph, when you look at one cycle here, it should be cosine. So you have the two choices, sine or cosine. We decided we are going to use cosine. Let's deal with the value of A. Value of A is amplitude. Amplitude means from the middle line to maximum, or from the middle line to minimum. So if you look at it, this case, it's very simple. It's like 1, 2, 3. When you deal with vertical shift later, it could be a little different. So they're introducing amplitude formula, maximum minus minimum divided by 2. That will give you amplitude. So maximum here is 3, minimum here is minus 3. So 3 minus 3 will give you 6. Divided by 2 is 3. This case is so simple, you can just 1, 2, 3. Do not make a mistake of counting that as amplitude. This is not amplitude. That is amplitude. Okay? So we got the amplitude as a 3. So you can update that y equal to 3 cosine bx. So as you noticed, all we need to find is the value of b and just plug it in and we are done. How do we find value of b? Value of b is related with the period. If you remember the period formula is 2 pi over b. That is a period formula. What is a period? Period is horizontal length of one cycle. This length from here to here. So if you look at it, 1, 2, 3, 4 tick mark right here, that 4 pi third is length from here to here, which is a period. That is a period. 4 pi third. Let that equal to 4 pi third, because that's a period equal to 4 pi third. All you have to do is solve for b. Fraction is equal to fraction. So one way you can deal with that is cross multiplication. This times this equal to this times this. So 2 pi times 3 equal to 4 pi times b. Solving for b, we need to get rid of a 4 pi from right hand side. Divide by 4 pi, divide by 4 pi, both sides. So b is equal to pi cancels out, 2 and 4 cancels out with 2. 3 over 2 is value of b. Okay, we just got the value of b from here. So update that. 3 over 2x, put a parenthesis, that is your final answer. Yeah. Okay, let's look at one more example. Write an equation of the form y equal to a sine bx or y equal to a cosine bx. First thing you need to do is it easier for me to use a cosine or sine here? How do we determine? Again, you start from the y-axis. Start from the x. So take a look at one cycle and look at it. On the y-axis, does graph start from the midline, or does graph start from the maximum? Or minimum? This one start from the midline. What does that tell you? That's a sine graph. So you should be familiar with this in your head. Middle, start from the middle, sine, start from the middle, sine, start from the top, maximum, that's a cosine, start from the minimum, that's a cosine. You should know this information. Then you start from the mid position, midline here, so you should know, this is a sine. It also shoots up first, so that's just a regular sine graph. If it start going down first and going up, that's gonna be sine graph with minus in front of it. So we decided this is a sine graph, so we are going to use sine function. So y equal to a sine bx. Amplitude is from midline to the maximum. So this thickness will be amplitude. So it's easy, just count it. It's going to be 4. Value of a is 4. Y equal to 4 sine bx. All you have to find is b value now. How do you find the b value? B value has a thing to do with the period. 2 pi over b is formula for calculating period. And you can read the period from this graph. One cycle is this. Horizontal length from here to here is period, which is 3 pi here. So period you read from the graph is 3 pi. Let that equal to each other, and you're solving for b. Okay, when you solve for b, 3 pi is exactly same as 3 pi over 1, and you're solving for b. Cross multiplication again. This times this equal to this times this. 2 pi times 1 equal to 3 pi times b. Solve for b. Divide by 3 pi, divide by 3 pi, both sides. This thing cancels out, pi cancels out, nothing to cancel further. Value of b is 2/3. Okay, so we got the 2/3. You plug it in b value here. So it should be what? Y equal to 4 sine 2/3 x. It's better to put parentheses here. That is your final answer. Okay, so you need to continue to watch the part 2 about the word problem.